As evening settled over Los Angeles on November 28, 2008, the city began to glow under a canopy of artificial lights. In the hushed atmosphere of a parking structure tucked away in the city, an abrupt and blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness, startling anyone within earshot. A witness later recounted catching a fleeting glimpse of a man in the distance. Due to the dimming light and the man's position, his facial features were obscured. Without hesitation, he leapt into the vehicle and sped away. Within moments of his escape, a shocking discovery was made. A woman was found lying motionless on the concrete. That woman was Pamela. Pamela Goody came into the world on August 31, 1963, in the quiet, mountain-rimmed city of Salt Lake City, Utah. From an early age, Pamela displayed a sharp mind, a resilient spirit, and a hunger for success that would one day propel her into the business world. After completing her education with commendable success, she stepped into adulthood with a deep sense of responsibility and ambition. Although the romance didn't stand the test of time, Pamela found herself embracing the challenge of single motherhood with grace and strength, choosing to raise her child alone and pour herself into creating a stable, nurturing environment. By the late 1980s, Pamela had carved out a career for herself. She was far from idle. Instead, she launched her own business in the jewelry industry, a sector she had long been passionate about. Her entrepreneurial journey began in 1989, when she established a small but promising company dealing in fine jewelry. But despite her professional success, Pamela's personal life remained somewhat unfulfilled. She longed for companionship and stability, a partner with whom she could share both the triumphs and trials of life. This longing came to an end in the mid-1990s, when she crossed paths with James Fayed, an electrician by trade. James was a hard-working, blue-collar man with big dreams of his own. He often spoke of building a life that included not just a family, but also a business he could proudly call his own. When James and Pamela met, there was an immediate and undeniable connection. In 1998, they tied the knot in a modest but joyful wedding ceremony held in the ever-vibrant city of Las Vegas, Nevada. However, the early years of their marriage were marked by hardship. Financial struggles soon emerged as a dark cloud over their seemingly bright union. The jewelry business that Pamela had worked so hard to build began to waver under economic pressures. While James juggled multiple contracts and projects to make ends meet, things became even more complicated after the birth of their second child. The household expenses increased, and the financial strain became overwhelming. Pamela had to make the difficult decision to seek government assistance in order to provide for her family. James, meanwhile, took on additional work, often accepting jobs that required him to travel for weeks at a time. His profession demanded long hours and frequent out-of-state assignments in order to meet client needs. It wasn't until 2002 that a significant turning point arrived for the couple. Faced with mounting challenges, they made a strategic decision to combine their efforts and start a new business venture together. They founded a company called Goldfinger, a business concept centered around the buying and selling of gold and other valuable items. Initially, they focused on acquiring gold jewelry and collectible coins, which they purchased from individuals looking for quick cash. They would later resell these items at a considerable markup, creating a lucrative revenue stream. This strategic move allowed them to accumulate capital and gradually scale their operations. Goldfinger operated in a way that resembled a pawn shop, though it was positioned more discreetly and catered to clients seeking short-term financial solutions. Customers would bring in their gold items and receive loans in exchange, with their valuables held as collateral. If the loan was repaid on time, the item would be returned to the client. If not, ownership of the gold transferred legally to Pamela and James. Around this time, global gold prices began to surge. By 2008, their stockpile of gold had appreciated significantly, turning their modest operation into a highly profitable enterprise. Their timing couldn't have been better, and the business flourished as a result. But with success came new tensions. Over time, cracks began to form in their marriage. James grew increasingly distant and detached, focusing more on the company's expansion and less on his relationship with Pamela. Simultaneously, James began to experience chronic health issues, including the onset of rheumatoid arthritis, a debilitating condition that made it difficult for him to maintain his demanding schedule and leadership responsibilities. As his health declined, Pamela gradually took on more of the administrative and strategic work to keep the company on track. In April 2007, a seemingly routine conversation would end up shifting the couple's dynamic in a significant way. While at the office, Pamela engaged in a discussion with an old friend named Carl, who operated a similar business in another part of the state. During their conversation, Pamela overheard something that troubled her deeply: the realization that they had never obtained the appropriate license for the type of financial transactions their company was conducting. Disturbed by the oversight, Pamela immediately resolved to correct the issue and ensure that their business complied with all state regulations. She saw this not only as a legal necessity, but also as a step toward long-term security for their company. That same year, on October 6th, Pamela received a check amounting to $400,000, a substantial sum earmarked specifically for covering the costs associated with licensing, legal fees, and mandatory state payments. Her decision to allocate this money toward legitimizing their operation did not sit well with James. From the outset, he dismissed the licensing efforts as a needless and expensive bureaucratic headache. He argued that their business had thrived without it thus far, and viewed Pamela's actions as an overreaction. But for Pamela, this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about protecting their livelihood and preventing future legal complications. This disagreement ignited long-standing tensions that had been quietly brewing beneath the surface. By October 2007, the situation had deteriorated beyond repair. After nearly a decade of marriage, James filed for divorce. The proceedings quickly turned adversarial. His objective became clear: to prevent her from completing the licensing process and to isolate her from any decision-making power within the company. The divorce proceedings between Pamela Goody and James Fayed soon spiraled into a heated and complex legal conflict that few could have anticipated. What began as a standard separation quickly escalated into a full-scale legal war, consuming not just their time and energy, but also their reputations and resources. The primary point of contention was their joint financial assets, specifically their company and shared bank accounts, which reportedly held more than $12 million at the time. Drawing on his legal team and exploiting every loophole available to him, he succeeded in having Pamela removed from any position of authority within the company they had built together. For Pamela, this was more than just a legal maneuver. It was a deeply personal blow. She had invested more than just money. She had given her time, her creative energy, and her trust. Her removal from the company not only stripped her of her role, but also erased her presence from the business that had once been her pride. Despite having been a wealthy woman not long before, Pamela now found herself in a precarious financial position. In order to continue fighting the legal battle, she had to borrow money just to afford the services of a competent legal team. This reversal of fortune, going from a multimillionaire entrepreneur to someone dependent on borrowed funds, was both humbling and heartbreaking. To make matters worse, James also took steps to sever Pamela's professional relationships. Pamela herself felt betrayed. She believed this campaign to discredit her was not only unnecessary but also deeply unethical. She had helped build Goldfinger from the ground up, contributing her expertise, connections, and tireless work ethic. In her eyes, this attempt to isolate her professionally was not just an attack on her business standing, but an attack on her identity. However, Pamela's challenges did not end with legal and financial issues. Not long after the divorce proceedings intensified, she learned that federal authorities had begun investigating Goldfinger for possible financial irregularities. Pamela was alarmed to discover that she herself was being scrutinized for potential fraud. The allegations came as a shock, particularly given her recent efforts to legitimize the business and obtain all necessary licenses. Fortunately, Pamela was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. The court reaffirmed her ownership stake in the company, acknowledging that her contributions had been both legitimate and substantial. For Pamela, it was a small but meaningful victory. After months of feeling powerless, she had reclaimed a part of what she had lost. But just as things appeared to be turning around, tragedy struck. On the evening of November 28, 2008, as daylight faded and the city's lights flickered on, a sudden and chilling scream pierced the calm of a parking structure in Los Angeles. Office workers, still leaving their jobs and heading to their cars, paused in alarm. One witness reported catching a glimpse of a man. his features obscured by the fading light and distance, who appeared to sprint away from the scene. The stranger jumped into a red SUV and sped off before anyone could intervene. Moments later, a woman was discovered lying on the ground near where the vehicle had been seen. It was Pamela. Although clearly injured, Pamela managed to pull herself up briefly. Witnesses recalled her turning toward one of the bystanders and pleading for help before collapsing again. Emergency services were quickly summoned. Police and medical personnel arrived at the scene within minutes. Paramedics provided immediate first aid and rushed her toward the nearest hospital. Despite their efforts, the injuries she sustained proved too severe. Tragically, Pamela passed away en route to the hospital. The Los Angeles Police Department immediately launched a full-scale investigation. Officers began interviewing the witness who had seen the fleeing vehicle, hoping to gather clues that might point to the identity of the assailant. Unfortunately, the witness was unable to offer a detailed description of the man, having only seen him for a few seconds. Still, security footage from the parking lot confirmed the witness's account. A red SUV had indeed exited the structure just moments after the scream was heard. Interestingly, there were no signs of theft. Pamela's handbag, jewelry, and other personal items were untouched. This led investigators to a chilling conclusion. The motive likely wasn't robbery. Rather, it seemed that Pamela had been specifically targeted. The deliberate nature of the act raised questions about who might have wanted to harm her, and why. In homicide investigations, especially those involving prominent individuals, the people closest to the victim are often examined first. In this case, James Fayed became an immediate person of interest. Not only had he been embroiled in a bitter legal dispute with Pamela, but he also stood to benefit financially from her absence. On the day of her death, the former couple had met with their respective attorneys, still attempting to resolve their disagreements over business assets and ownership rights. The law office they visited was located in the very same building as the parking lot where Pamela was later found. According to detectives, after the legal meeting concluded, Pamela left the office alone and walked to her vehicle, which was parked on the third level of the parking structure. Investigators noted that James would have known her schedule and location that day. This detail was critical, as it could have provided both motive and opportunity. Some within the investigative team believed that this combination of knowledge and animosity pointed to James as a potential orchestrator of the attack. However, when questioned, James denied any involvement. He remained calm and composed throughout the interrogation, firmly maintaining that he had no role in what had happened. His legal team provided a strong alibi, supported by the presence of James at the law office during the relevant time, as well as video footage confirming his location. Additionally, his attorney and other witnesses attested to his whereabouts during the key window of time. Faced with these facts, investigators had no choice but to release him. All surveillance footage from the surrounding area, including internal garage cameras, external parking structure feeds, and nearby traffic cameras, was quickly collected and turned over to law enforcement authorities. This footage became a critical part of the investigation and allowed detectives to piece together a more complete timeline of events leading up to the tragic incident. One thing stood out almost immediately. Among the many people captured on video was James Fayed himself. After the meeting with attorneys earlier that day, he was seen calmly exiting the office building. What struck the detectives was how composed, almost unnaturally relaxed James appeared. Despite the surrounding chaos that had begun to unfold after Pamela's scream, witnesses in the area were startled and visibly shaken, and several had rushed to see what had happened. Yet James, who had only recently concluded a tense legal discussion with his former spouse, walked away with what investigators described as an eerily unaffected demeanor. Detectives noted that such behavior can sometimes indicate foreknowledge, an understanding of what was about to occur, leading to a conscious decision to avoid being present during the discovery of the incident. Though not definitive evidence on its own, it was enough to keep James firmly in the crosshairs of the ongoing investigation. As police continued to review the footage frame by frame, a clearer picture of the actual attack began to emerge. Pamela had left the building and was walking toward her vehicle, which was parked on the third floor of the structure. From the angle of the footage, investigators could see that a red SUV, the same vehicle mentioned by witnesses, had been slowly circling the upper levels of the parking lot minutes before Pamela arrived. It then stopped in a nearby row, almost as if lying in wait. As Pamela approached her car and reached into her purse for the keys, the SUV moved abruptly and came to a stop in a position that appeared to block her in. At that precise moment, a figure leaped from the back seat and moved swiftly toward her. Though the actual assault was not clearly captured due to camera angles, the speed and precision of the person's movements suggested that the act was carefully planned. Pamela had been watched, tracked, and intercepted. From there, investigators shifted their focus to the vehicle itself. By tracking the license plate, they discovered that the SUV had been rented just 2 days earlier from a well-known car rental company located near downtown Los Angeles. The rental agreement provided law enforcement with a new set of leads. Once the vehicle was located and secured, forensic teams carried out an extensive analysis of the interior. They searched for fingerprints, hair, fabric fibers, and any other trace materials that could offer clues. Their diligence paid off. In the narrow seams of the rear seat upholstery, forensic specialists discovered a small amount of DNA evidence, most likely left behind by someone who had recently crouched or moved quickly through the area. Even more promising, surveillance cameras in and around the parking garage had captured clear images of 3 individuals who had either entered or exited the SUV at various times. The clarity of the images allowed authorities to run facial recognition comparisons and eventually match them with names in law enforcement databases. The trio identified were Jose Moya, Gabriel Marquez, and Stephen Moya. Of the 3, Jose Moya stood out immediately. He was not just a random individual with a criminal background. He had long-standing personal ties to both James and Pamela. For several years, Jose had worked on the Fayed family's private estate, helping to maintain the ranch and managing various domestic tasks. He was known to the family and had even attended several private events hosted by the couple. When investigators compared the attacker's silhouette and physical build, captured on camera with photographs of Jose, the resemblance was striking. This, combined with his known association with the Fayed family, elevated Jose from a person of interest to a prime suspect. With appropriate legal clearance, they accessed cell phone records, GPS logs, and call histories. The results were revealing. Data indicated that both Gabriel and Stephen's mobile devices had pinged off a cell tower located just 100 meters from the parking structure at the approximate time of the incident. These devices had not only been in the vicinity, they had remained there for a significant window of time before and after the event. These details, when considered alongside the forensic evidence and surveillance footage, painted a picture of a coordinated operation. Each new piece of data added to the growing stack of evidence that suggested this was more than just a crime of passion. It was a calculated attempt to remove someone who had become a threat to certain interests. As the net tightened around the trio, federal agencies began to take interest. Once news of the attack intersected with an ongoing financial investigation into the Goldfinger Company, both the FBI and Internal Revenue Service, IRS, formally joined the case. What they uncovered added a whole new dimension to the story. Authorities discovered that the Fayed family business had been operating through a web of shell companies and front organizations, one of which was deeply entangled in a suspected money laundering operation. The scale of the operation was significant. Millions of dollars were being cycled through fake invoices, sham transactions, and off-the-book sales, eventually being laundered through a partner company with international reach. 2 fraudulent financial schemes were uncovered in the process, one involving inflated asset valuations to acquire illicit loans, and another that used gold purchases to obscure the origin of funds. In hindsight, Pamela's push to obtain official licensing for Goldfinger in 2007, an act that had caused so much friction with James, made perfect sense. She had unknowingly stumbled into a dangerous world of concealed accounts and false records. The spotlight also returned to Jose Moya. The investigation assumed that he had infiltrated the family of the wealthy couple for a reason, but he categorically denied that he had any involvement at all. In order to put this man behind bars for a long time, much more was needed than just surveillance camera footage. James was soon charged with conducting illegal financial operations, a serious white-collar offense that carried substantial prison time. It turned out that Pamela's actions in the months leading up to the incident were no coincidence. Her sudden interest in obtaining proper licensing and paying outstanding business fees had a deeper motive. Unbeknownst to many, Pamela had already been contacted by the FBI shortly before her death. The timing of this contact proved crucial. It was during these initial meetings with federal agents that Pamela learned the disturbing truth about her husband's activities. Years of financial records and business dealings were beginning to show signs of fraudulent activity, implicating James in schemes that funneled illicit money through the family business. Pamela, committed to doing the right thing, had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. She was preparing to hand over a trove of documents and evidence during a planned meeting, evidence that could have permanently dismantled James's operation and led to a cascade of legal consequences. According to federal agents, they had no doubt that James had discovered her cooperation. Whether through intercepted communications or subtle behavioral changes, it became evident to him that his former spouse was about to expose everything. That realization, they believed, may have led him to the conclusion that she had to be silenced before she could jeopardize everything he had built. August 2008. James Fayed, then 45 years old, was arrested at his sprawling ranch. The operation was conducted early in the morning by FBI agents who had obtained an arrest warrant based on the financial evidence they had compiled. James appeared stunned by the presence of law enforcement, though he remained composed as agents read him the list of charges. Without resistance, he requested his attorney and was taken into federal custody. In the days that followed, James continued to assert his innocence, dismissing the charges as exaggerated or misconstrued. Internal records, witness statements, and bank transfers all pointed to James as the mastermind behind the misuse of funds. Not long after his arrest for financial crimes, James was also formally charged with orchestrating the murder of his ex-wife. However, this charge proved harder to substantiate. Despite strong suspicions and circumstantial evidence, direct proof linking him to the planning of the crime was elusive. Phone records and digital correspondence among the suspected participants had been carefully deleted. Then, in a surprising turn of events, an unexpected opportunity arose from within the very jail where James was being held. One of his cellmates, a man named Smith, came forward to share concerns about James's behavior. Smith claimed that although James was polite and charismatic, he often made veiled references to problems that would go away soon, and hinted that people sometimes had to take care of things themselves. Detectives saw potential in this. With Smith's cooperation, and under legal authorization, they arranged for him to wear a concealed listening device in hopes of capturing an unguarded confession. In exchange, Smith hoped for a reduced sentence in his own pending case. The very same evening, he returned to the shared cell and struck up a deep, personal conversation with James. Over the course of the recorded exchange, James made a chilling admission. Believing Smith to be trustworthy, he opened up about what had really happened. He explained how he had enlisted Jose Moya, a former employee and someone who had been around the Fayed estate for years, to carry out the attack. James admitted to offering Moya $225,000 for the job, a sum large enough to ensure cooperation and silence. But what was perhaps even more alarming was what James said next. He revealed that once the crime had been committed, his next step was to eliminate Moya himself. His plan had been to hire a second individual to permanently silence the first, thus removing the one person who could connect him to the murder. This second hit was never carried out, but the intent alone demonstrated the level of calculation involved. Further investigation revealed that Jose Moya had not acted alone. He had later involved two other individuals, Gabriel Marquez and Stephen Moya, to assist him. Surveillance footage from the parking lot, which had been thoroughly analyzed months earlier, showed all three men together in the red SUV, confirming their involvement at the scene. Authorities concluded that Jose was likely the primary attacker, while the other two were there to provide backup and ensure the plan's success. The complexity of the case, combined with the layers of financial and criminal charges, meant that the prosecution required nearly 3 years to prepare for trial. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed, records were reconstructed, and expert testimonies were gathered to paint a full picture of the events. One of the more surprising witnesses was James's own sister, Mary Fayed. She testified under oath that she had once dated Jose Moya and had been approached by her brother to participate in the planning. She had refused, but admitted she was deeply unsettled by the request. Mary also disclosed that she later shared this information with James's other sister, Patty, who, in turn, made a shocking suggestion. According to testimony, Patty proposed that her own husband, a law enforcement officer in Wyoming, could potentially carry out the act in exchange for money. Ultimately, the district attorney's office was able to secure a conviction. With overwhelming evidence, including the secret recording from jail, the financial trail, and testimonies from those close to the defendant, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. James Fayed was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. In a final ruling that marked the end of a long and complex case, the judge sentenced James to death, describing his actions as those of a person who had manipulated, deceived, and destroyed lives for personal gain. Jose Moya, along with his 2 accomplices, was found guilty of carrying out a contract killing. All 3 were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.